All right, we're official now. We're recording. Okay, well, everybody, thank you for being here. Welcome to our second quarterly business breakfast. We're glad everybody could make it. We want to make sure that everybody has a good seat, a good bagel, and a good coffee or whatever you drink. So I'm Mayor Rilling, and I want to thank Sabrina Church Godeski, our Director of Business and Tourism, for hosting this. You know, we in Norwalk, and obviously thank you, Brian, for being here because we work very closely with the Chamber of Commerce, and we want to support our small businesses, our nonprofits, making sure that you have the resources that you need to succeed. You know, we know that the small businesses are the backbone of our community. You hire a lot of local people. And so it's in our best interest to make sure that you succeed. Today, you're going to hear from Steve Kleppen and Jessica Ivanishek regarding our new zoning regulations. And Sabrina is going to be talking, let me make sure I have it right. Sabrina is going to be talking about, I have my glasses on. Yeah, Norwalk Job Board, and Norwalk jobs for Norwalk residents, and which is always a good thing. And when I always go to cut a ribbon or whatever, I always ask people, the new businesses, how many people are you hiring? And I always follow it up with how many of them are from Norwalk, because we have a lot of people in Norwalk that certainly could benefit from those jobs, and that helps us as well. And then she's also Innovation Initiative, which provides funding to some of our small businesses. We are business friendly. We have grants, we have loans, we have facade improvement programs, so that our business people can access those resources to help them do what they need to do best. And Sabrina is going to talk about that and explain how some of our small businesses and nonprofits might be able to access those programs. And then Steve and Jessica are going to be talking about our new zoning regulations. It's a draft right now. We'd like to hear your feedback on that and get some thoughts and ideas relative to what you see. It's been about 40 years or so since we've had a new, since we've gone over the zoning regulations. We want to make them more user-friendly, more understandable, more navigable. I go back to the time when I retired from the police department. I was appointed to the zoning commission. It's now planning and zoning. And I was brought in for an orientation by the then director of planning and zoning, and given a stack of paper like this and told, okay, well, you read that and you'll know everything that there is to know about our zoning regs. Well, needless to say that I think I used it to start a fire in my fireplace, because there's no way you're going to read all this and understand it, because this is going to contradict that and so forth. So I'm looking forward to working closely with Steve and Jessica when we get the final product. So again, thank you for being here, and I will introduce Sabrina first, and thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mayor, for kicking us off. Before we get started, can I have a show of hands of how many realtors are here? Yeah, there's a good amount of you. That's great to know. So everything that I'm going to say in the beginning is either for small businesses directly, or things that you should be telling your clients or people that are trying to move to the city that we have available. So if you were here for the last business roundtable, we walked through the Kiva microloan program that we have, the storefront improvement program that we have, as well as Visit Norwalk, which is a free marketing resource for all businesses in Norwalk, as well as the Norwalk for Business site that we had just launched that has all of our financial resources and kind of all of our demographic information that some clients might be interested in. So I'll get started now. We're going to first go through kind of a quick, you guys have this in front of you, I hope, but we're going to go over the job board and then the launch of that Norwalk Innovations program, which I'll get into, and then I'll throw it over to Steve to do the zoning update. And then after that, if it was your last time, we just do a quick, raise your hand, I'll run over to you after. That's it. Development that houses kind of building code, planning and zoning, business development and tourism, and transportation, parking, and mobility. So if you have questions there, as well as kind of some in-depth, complicated questions about zoning that you might be interested in. So if you have Steve to answer those as well, and obviously me if I can answer them. First up is the Norwalk Job Board. We had a partnership through Norwalk Act, our community partners, including large corporations from the city and the Norwalk Chamber of Commerce. We created this job board in hopes to further workforce development initiatives in the city. So what makes this different is that it's super affordable. So as $1 one listing on highlighting jobs that necessarily don't require a degree. Talking about, people who are just entering the workforce, people who might have chosen a different career path and didn't go through the traditional educational pathway that, we're accustomed to knowing at this point in time, which are becoming obviously more and more popular as college gets more expensive and secondary education gets more expensive. And then this is also very important that we kind of made this because not only are we connecting local employment to local individuals, we're also giving local individuals and kind of the workforce pool here access to jobs that are close to home, access to jobs that have career advancing opportunities, and access to livable wage, which if you're not going to college, it's very hard to fill that gap. Those jobs are definitely out there, but they're not as well advertised. So we're hopeful that this will kind of bridge the gap between those two things. So if you guys have questions about that, I'm here, Brian's here, also Norwalk Act. If you want to reach out to them, they're also on our Norwalk for Business website. And I'm happy to make the connection if you want that as well. So next we'll jump into the Norwalk Innovation Initiative. So this is kind of the exciting money part of today. So we'll have $175,000 this year for grants to businesses. These are specifically for startups, entrepreneurs, and businesses that are expanding. So if you have between 2 and 50 employees or plan to have between 2 and 50 employees, this program is something that you should be interested in or your clients should be interested in. We are going to be releasing applications today. So all of your email inboxes later on today will have the links to this, but you'll be able to scan a QR code in a minute and get availability to that. So we're going to do rolling applications. However, have participated in an educational, financial, or mentorship relationship with any of these individuals. It can also be the city of Norwalk. We do provide technical assistance to individuals if they can provide any sort of proof that they've done any of these programs. The Small Business Development Academy through the Chamber of Commerce is another good one. SCORE has obviously their mentorship program. If they can prove to us that they can be eligible for the program. And then last but not least, kind of our jargon on our side. So be current on all your taxes and then obviously not have any zoning or blight violations. If you're somebody who doesn't have a storefront at this point, the last one doesn't really apply, but just making sure that all that's in check. So this is the funding breakdown. So we heard at the last business roundtable that we want to fill those ground floor commercial vacancies. So we're going to allow that 50% of the funding in each round be to commercial ground floor spaces or just commercial spaces in general. Obviously, this can be flexible depending on the applicants that we have, but these are kind of the goals we're looking to meet. 30% of the funding will be for WME businesses. We've done this for every single program that we've had up to this point, and we're going to continue that. We've been able to highly exceed that goal every program that we've had released, and that we're really proud of that. I think it talks to kind of our demographics here in Norwalk and our business owners as well, which is really great. And then 20% of that funding will also be used in the realm of creative economy. So creative economy is marketing, design, manufacturing, kind of all of these arts and cultural type of businesses that we're looking at and that we're looking to encourage in the city. And these can, obviously overlap, but this is kind of where this funding is going to be prioritized. So what can you use the money for? business registration fees, LLCs, registration, local permitting, rent, utility, machineries, kind of everything under the gamut of startup expenditures. If you need to pay to fit out your physical space on the outside or inside, we do have programs that also address the outside so that you can overlap, but there's both of these programs now available. The program that we currently have in place that you've heard about, which is the storefront improvement program, only does the outside of the building. So this will do both the inside and the outside if you so choose to do that. Or if you want to use this for more operational fees, you can do that as well. So this is the QR code for the application, but if you were to go to the tiny URL link, again, you guys have all gotten my emails, I hope, so you'll be able to see this application later today. Shout out to Pedro Mata over there who did our application for us and our guidelines. Couldn't have done it without you. So we'll talk a little bit more about the approval process. So you apply, you put your application in, we do a preliminary check on the business. If everything checks out for us, we will enter you into the Shark Tank-like activity. I'm sure you're all aware of what kind of pitching to investors looks like. And that's what we'll have. So depending on our applicants, we're going to have specific industry experts that will be your panelists. So not only are the businesses getting the opportunity to get funding, they're getting the opportunity to get advice, a mentor, somebody who's on their team, somebody who's willing to help. So after that happens, there's a traditional rubric where we average your score. Based on that score and how the pitch went, we'll be awarded funding, and we can do, anywhere for a couple $1,000s to, $10,000 to $20,000. It really just depends on what we have available and the amount of applicants that we have. So all of this is available on the New York for Business website. We can't stress it enough. If you want to quickly, especially as a realtor, you want to say, here's everything New York has to offer, this is what you give them. If you're a service industry or a restaurant, give them this and visit Norwalk. But this one specifically has your financial resources that people are going to be very interested in, as well as, like I said before, the demographics. So definitely pushing this heavily on your clients is great. And again, if you guys need technical assistance, the Business Development Center is open. You can send your clients to us. We're there every day from 9 to 4. I'm personally there every Wednesday from 9 to 4. So if you want to send your clients to us, or if anybody, yourselves or anybody else, needs assistance on any of our programs, like state programs, the permitting process, anything like that, feel free to reach out to us and stop by. And now I'll throw it over to Steve Kleppen. And like I said, we'll have Q&A at the end of this. So hold your questions and we'll go through that. And Steve, go ahead.
Good morning. Can you guys hear me in the back?
Yeah.
Sabrina's got a great moving speaking voice. I do not, so hopefully that's good. So as the mayor mentioned earlier, we haven't updated the zoning regulations in over 30 years. There's been a lot of piecemeal changes over time. So I think that's led to some problems and some things that affect what we do today in terms of land use and business practices. So what I'd like to do, kind of go over why we're making the changes that we're proposing, what are some of the impacts that you might see at the business level, and then kind of like a little bit about the process and the next steps on where the whole process is going. I was talking to Brian Griffin right before we started about maybe we'll set up a separate meeting with interested parties. I know we've talked to a lot of attorneys, architects, engineers. They all have kind of questions because this is kind of their bread and butter, what they do in the city. So we'll probably facilitate a meeting with those folks, just kind of hear questions, comments, and concerns about those things. So why are we changing the code? So in addition to not being updated in over 30 years, the existing regulations, if anybody's ever had the opportunity or the need to look at them, they're very convoluted. The sections of the regulations require you to look in multiple areas to get the answer to a single question. Oftentimes there's contradictory language within the regulations themselves. So you really need to be an expert on that document to kind of work your way through it because it's not a very user friendly. Currently, the zoning regulations have 31 different zones. It's a lot of zones. There's also 5 single-family zones, which is a lot of single-family zones. So we're proposing to knock that down to 14 base zones with some overlay zones. Not to get too much into the weeds, but an overlay zone basically is, there's the underlying zoning, could be the single family zoning, but on top of that, there's another layer which could allow you to do some different things, or it could be more restrictive depending on how it's structured. So this is the current zoning map on the left, and what's circled on the far left is the legend, and the legend is all the different zones. You can see there's a lot of zones, there's a lot of colors. On the right is a kind of a zoom in on a section of Main Avenue. You can see that within a short stretch of area, there's, you're talking about probably 7 different zones. So you go from commercial to 1 family to 2 family to multifamily to back to 2 family to commercial. There's no rhyme or reason or pattern of why these things are. It's very confusing. It's not set up well. And so what we're doing is kind of trying to break it down and restart things. Also, when the city did the 2019 Plan of Conservation Development, which we call the citywide plan, in that, which is consistent with most POCs, there's a future land use map. And the future land use map kind of lays out recommendations on how you want to use your land going forward. So it's a good practice to have your zoning in alignment with that future land use. The city also has a policy that we want to focus our development near transit, infrastructure, and employment centers, which I think is kind of common sense if you really think about it. We have areas, up in Cranberry and other areas which are more suburban in nature, and it doesn't really make sense to shove development and things up in that area when those properties, for the most part, don't have infrastructure. They're on private wells, they're on their own septic system, so you don't really need to have, I'm not sure what it's about. So we don't need to have those things in that area of the city. So what we've tried to do is develop a different kind of code, which is kind of a hybrid code. I'll get into in just a second. Speaking about where we develop, this is kind of a map on the right, shows you where we've decided to focus our development, starting kind of from north to south. Up to the north area, this is the Merit 7 area where the city's concentration of highest concentration of Class A office spaces. And on the west side of Glover Avenue, last year, maybe 18 months ago now, the city approved a large redevelopment for Building and Land Technology, who has kind of control over the whole west side of that area. There's a new train station being developed there. So we're trying to create kind of a little bit of a sort of a TOD ecosystem in that area. Working further south, we're into the West Ave Wall Street area, and then further south into South Norwalk. Our goal is to combine those 2 areas, really to develop the city's urban core, which is where we're seeing most of our development now anyway. So it makes sense to consolidate those areas. We have some smaller areas of development in East Norwalk, which we did a rezoning a couple of years ago around the East Norwalk train station, and then along the Route 1 corridor as well. And we want to really change the Route 1 corridor for what it is today. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. I mentioned what the hybrid code is. And right now our zoning is traditional zoning, which most municipalities practice. It's called Euclidean zoning, which really the intent of that is to separate uses. One of the primary drivers when it was first developed was, I own a single family house. I don't want you opening slaughterhouses. No one's opening slaughterhouses. Simple example to think about. But that's a little bit outdated in kind of thinking about it. A newer practice and a newer model, which a lot of communities are going to, is called form-based. The form-based code does not look at so much the use. It doesn't look at use so much. It really looks about the relationship between the built environment, which is the structures and the buildings and the landscape and the street view of things in relation to what the pedestrian experience is. So that's kind of, it does talk about use, but it's not the primary focus. But Norwalk's not a completely urban community, obviously. So it doesn't make sense to apply that same model if you're talking about the more suburban areas. It's a traditional larger lot single family zone. So we've kind of kept that portion of the zoning very consistent and similar to what it is today, but going with this form-based model in and around our major commercial areas and our multi-family. So this is kind of what the form-based code is built upon. It's called Transect. So this is not directly translatable to Norwalk because this area off to the right, which is called CD1, and that stands for Community District. That's how we're relabeling all the zones. This could be, you're out in the middle of Montana, and you have like a ranch, you've got 150 acres. So obviously that doesn't translate to Norwalk. Where Norwalk kind of comes into play is where we start to get this CD3, which is kind of a suburban model that's similar to what we have in our single family zoning. The CD4 is pretty prominent in the city. That's right now our less dense multifamily. And then the CD5 is where we have, I was talking about Merit 7, West Ave, Wall Street, and South Norwalk, which was rezoned around the train station. There's also more dense areas which we don't have, like CD6, and that's when you're starting to get into like Manhattan. We don't have any of that in the city, or not proposing it. There are also special districts where we have like our hospital zone, our industrial zones, and we also have a civic district, which is meant to handle municipal properties, whether that's city, states, or like potentially taxing. Some other reasons why we're doing the rezoning is, there's a lot of significant land use issues going on, not only in Norwalk, but in the state. We have, people don't always like to agree with this, but we do have a housing crisis. We live in one of the most expensive areas in the country to live, Fairfield County in particular. And we also have an area of extremely low vacancy. So when you put those two things together, it just jacks up the housing price for everybody. And it particularly affects, if my kids are 20 and 16, I don't know if they're going to be able to live, I don't live in Fairfield County, or where I live is not cheap either. I don't know if my kids are going to be able to afford to live here. Will they be able to put a down payment on the house? How do we kind of help facilitate those things? So those are some of the things that we think about when we're doing our rezoning, which is why we made some of the proposed recommendations to the land use map that we did. We're also dealing with potential issues of climate change. How is that going to impact where we live and how we live going forward? I mentioned the existing regulations are kind of a convoluted mess. So we think, even though these regulations look completely different, and if you looked at them at all, you're probably going to say, how is it simpler? When you first look at it, I agree. It looks like a brand new language, but once you start getting used to it and familiar with it, it becomes more simple and more straightforward to apply. And also, we have a lot of conversations when we get into the development arena about what should the city be responsible for, what should the private developer be responsible for. If we're letting them build all these new units, why aren't they kicking in more on the improvement side of things? So that's a constant tug of war we have on the application stage. So here's an example of what the new code looks like. This on the left is kind of like the preamble page for each zone. This zone is called CD4C, which is Community District. The C means commercial. That is basically area that encompasses the Route 1 corridor, which is one of my big pet peeves in Norwalk, because if you drive into Westport or you drive into Darien, you go, why does it look so much different in those two areas? It's just because Norwalk's allowed it to look the way it looks. We have massive seas of asphalt with buildings set way back. The building designs are not always the most attractive. The signage pattern is pretty disjointed. So we hope, and this is going to be a 30, 40-year process, as those properties redevelop, they don't look the way they look now. We want it to look a lot different. And on the left is the second page that's each one of the set of regulations. And these are where you start getting to more familiar terms that people see, like front setback, side setback, rear setback. So that's not new language. Everybody that's applied zoning before has seen that. And a lot of those numbers don't change from the existing code to the proposed code. So that provides some degree of familiarity for folks. And what you see here, what we've done now in another major flaw in the existing regulations is each zone, just if you go in there, it's just a massive list of different uses. And each zone has all these uses. So we put together a use table. And on the left, I've kind of blown up, what the different zones are. So across the top on each page, and there's about 20 odd pages, these are all the zones across the top. I've kind of blown them up here. And then all the uses are listed, and they're not in alphabetical order, but they're grouped together. So the commercial uses are grouped together, the retail uses are grouped together, the housing ones, industrial, and so forth. So the table set up, laptop is very touchy. The table set up so it gives you, which I think somewhat straightforward. P is permitted, so that means that use is permitted in the zone. NP means it's not permitted in the zone. PL means it's permitted with limitations. So if you go to the end of the table, if it's got a PL next to the use, all the uses are in alphabetical order and it tells you what the limitation is. We've already found some errors. So if you've gone through this, you can say this doesn't make sense. We've already flagged some things that got coded wrong that we'll fix before the final draft is adopted. And the other one on here that's worth talking about is SPU, which means it's a special permit use. And so if it's a special permit use, that means it goes to the Planning and Zoning Commission for a public hearing. There's neighbor notifications, and there are additional standards that get applied to that particular use in that zone. The code also does a good job, and this is one of the kind of key things with a form-based code. It provides images and guidance on what the buildings should look like. So the form-based code is looking at the massing of the structure and kind of like the scale of the structure. So these are some of the commercial building types here. Here's like what's called like a typical commercial building or a mixed-use building. And on the right, it tells you all the zones that are allowed there. There's a definition for each one of these buildings at the back, so it's not the only place you could find clarity on those. And it kind of gives you a general description of what those building types are. And then further on, after that, like listing of buildings, it zooms in on, and I picked out just a typical commercial building, expands on what that description is, tells you the districts that's in there, tells you, refers you back to certain sections on how tall it is or what the different parameters are. So I think this will be helpful going forward. So there's some, if you're a developer or a realtor or somebody in the related business, you have some certainty of what the city's expectation is going to be on when you develop a project. So what are some of the larger, and these are, big picture impacts that you folks might see. As I mentioned, we're consolidating areas of South Norwalk up to like the Wall Street area, just north of that out to Route 1. The existing areas right now, there's 6 or 7 overlapping zones in a very short area. So we're thinking it makes sense to consolidate that now because a lot of the zones that are there today have very similar parameters in terms of what the density is and what the height should be. And so we kind of view that as the city's urban core. It might make sense to consolidate that and have a level playing field in terms of what the uses are. Right now, the Route 1 corridor, whether it's Westport Ave or Connecticut Ave, it has a business number 1 in the business number 2 zone. I have no idea why we have a business number 1 in a business number 2 zone because they both basically do the same thing. So we've consolidated that into this new CD4C zone, as I mentioned, with the overall goal of over time, and time here is a long period of time, 30, 40 years, that Route 1 corridor does not look like the Route 1 corridor today. Aesthetically, it's more pleasing, it's more pedestrian friendly. We're looking at specific areas, which we'll probably do after the rewrite is done, is trying to develop kind of nodes of activity around key intersections. So it has a much more pedestrian and mixed use feeling to it, and it's not car centric and unfriendly if you're like walking through there. We've also consolidated the smaller multifamily zone, which is what's called the D zone today, with the neighborhood business zone, which is kind of a catch-all zone. The impacts of that is they're very similar in terms of the density. The neighborhood business would now get to go a story higher, and also within that smaller multifamily, you can do some small scale commercial. So the idea being, if you're in these zones, we want to make it a little more pedestrian friendly, make it a little more convenient to walk to a small store, a small business or something like that within your neighborhood. So here's what I was talking about with consolidating that kind of urban core of the city. The map on the left is the proposed map. This purplish, maybe we'll call it periwinkle color, is this new CD5 zone, where on the right is the existing zone. You can kind of see, this is that northern boundary, and this is the southern boundary. You can see there's like 6 or 7 zones here, and they kind of overlap. There's no kind of rhyme or reason why we needed all these things. I think at one time there was probably more of a master planning component that was put into this, but I don't think it ever got off the ground the way it was intended to do. The other thing to highlight on here is this green, which is that civic zone, which I talked about. So that's Lockwood Matthews, and also the state right of way as well. So that's kind of meant to handle those municipal or governmental properties. One thing the civic zone does as well is it provides some flexibility to the city on how we regulate our own property, but also provides protections. So if you're up in like a single family zone and there's like a 50-acre property there could be a school site, for example, you're not negatively impacted by what's going to happen on the city property, but at the same time, the city's not hamstrung on how we redevelop based on broader community needs. On the zoning map itself, there's certain properties along the harbor and the waterfront that are labeled TBD for to be determined. We've been having ongoing conversations with the Common Council on what the best land use is for those properties, and hopefully we'll have a resolution sometime July timeframe, and then whatever changes and recommendations come out of that will get incorporated into the final document. Some other changes, and these are kind of getting into the weeds a little bit. We no longer regulate height by a measurement, by feet, because when people really can't perceive feet, I can tell you something's 30 feet or 35 feet. I can guarantee you have no idea what the difference is, but you can tell what number of stories is. So you can see that there's a ground level with a series of windows, there's a middle level with a series of windows, and then there's an upper level with a series of windows. So how do we control height? You control the height by regulating how tall the stories can be within that. And that's all within the code. And we tried to match that up pretty similarly to what the existing regulations are, being mindful that people are very cognizant and concerned about loom of building height. We're no longer regulating what's called floor area ratio, or FAR. That's kind of an outdated metric that looks at how much volume of a building can be on a property. What really regulates how much building goes on a property is the number of parking spaces you require, how tall you let the building become, and how much of the property you let the building occupy. So we regulate total impervious surface, which regulates the amount of parking and hardscape you have on the property. There are a whole new series of sustainability measures built into the new regulations. That's been a big driver, not only from the city government side, but also the Planning and Zoning Commission has been pushing for that. And we're having ongoing conversations on how to further regulate that, but also trying to get a better understanding of what the impacts are on a project, because it's super important to regulate these things, but at the same time, when you add cost to a project, that adds cost that gets passed on to the tenant, whether that's a commercial tenant or a residential tenant. So we're trying to, find a, happy medium with those things. We've proposed some pretty significant changes to the flood regulations, which is really impacts more of the residential side of things. If you're a realtor, you may have come across this. Norwalk's regulations are pretty strict, probably the most strict in the state. There's a reason for that, we think, but we're cognizant of so we proposed some changes to that, which I think loosened it up. We've also put in some increased public notification standards. Let's get a slide now. Increased public notification standards. A lot of times that I didn't know this was going on next to me. I didn't know there was a hearing going on. I wasn't notified. So we put in some additional standards to help facilitate that, which I think, for our end, it's really not a big thing, but I think it'll, make some of the community folks happy. So what we've been doing since the end of April, conversations like this throughout all the Common Council districts. I have one more tonight, which is the District A meeting, library at 6 o'clock. Appeals doing the same thing. Brian in my office is about to do this as well. So, and I mentioned we were happy to come talk with this business professional side if anybody has concerns or questions. So we'll be doing that through probably the middle of June. The Planning and Zoning Commission has 2 public hearings scheduled, one June 21st, the second one June 28th, and those are really we are going to do probably a table for an hour and a half at one of those, so just a heads up. But they're really intended for anybody to come in, or actually probably be virtual, but express your concerns. Staff will provide a response, and then the Planning and Zoning Commission is going to collect all this feedback they've been getting in writing, as well as a verbal testimony. And then they're going to, over the summer and into the fall, they're going to have to make a decision on what changes they want to incorporate and which ones they don't. And then that will be the final document, looking for a vote probably sometime in September, early October, which will effective date, I'm guessing, probably around January 1st of 2024. And the reason for kind of interim period in between is A, we've got to make the edits, and B, there's going to be some folks who probably, they've been working with these regulations for, 20, 30 years and had certain expectations with their properties. So this gives them a little bit of buffer time in relation to the old regulation. So I think that's just fair because it's such a monumental change. And I think that's it. Do you have any questions? My email's here. If you have specific questions,
Sweet. I have a running mic now, so please raise your hand if you have a question. All right, I'm gonna go front to back.
I just have a question for you. So with the funding that's coming, I know it's probably not geared to a particular, age group, but, we deal with young people, typically high schoolers, all the way up into middle schools too, but all the way up to 25 in the sense of people that really want to start their business. So with that, two questions, can that application be used for them? And I know you mentioned that they need like a brick and mortar, right?
They don't need to. 50% of the funding is going to be used to support that, but they don't need to right now.
Okay, so they don't have to have a brick and mortar.
Yeah, they just have to intend to permit something at some point, a business at some point, and also they have to have one employee, so it has to be revenue themselves.
Okay, and so it's 2 employees including them. And do they have to have the business plan and all of that stuff?
Yes, so
Okay.
that's what we're gonna be expecting for you to submit. We have the Shark Tank event, we'll have to have a business plan, pitch deck, and then they'll be bringing up for it after that.
Okay, and how many people can apply? Because so if say you got 100 people apply, they're all gonna participate in that Shark Tank.
Correct, so if hopefully we do get 100 people to apply, but what we're gonna end up doing is have different types of sharks for each industry group, so that we'll have multiple days of Shark Tank, so we're not having one event and then we're done and be over the course of a few weeks with different sharks, so that people can get the assistance they need, both on the technical and mentorship side are also.
Yeah, because I was thinking, right, because how does the DEI plays a part, right? Because some people might not have the best presentation skills or whatever the case may be. So what would the rubric be, what consists of? Because say I'm not a really good presenter, but I have a great idea. So how would that,
So the rubric is actually online in the guidelines document, but it includes kind of both those facets, including kind of like you get points for a yes or no. So if you're a WME, you get points or you don't get points. But also they have a section based on the presenter as a person. Kind of, are you enthusiastic? Are you, do you know anything about your business? Are you very confident? And then the other half of the rubric is really like, is your business idea one that's super unique? Is your business idea something that falls into the category that we're prioritizing? Is your business idea something that the market hasn't seen before? Those types of things. So it balances all that pretty evenly. So it just depends really on the presentation and kind of how that process goes with the sharks. That would be grading those, and then after we get all those in, we're going to average them, and then that'll be
and where are the sharks coming from? Like who will be the sharks?
So it's really going to depend. So if we have 100 applicants and 20 of those applicants are retail focused businesses, for example, say they're only restaurants, then we have specific restaurant industry professionals as well as kind of either real estate agents or landlords that own kind of real estate for that specific business. So we're going to tailor them based on our applicants. So we don't have a big list now, but we have kind of people in mind that would fit the industry depending on the applicants that we get.
Okay, thanks.
No problem.
Oh, I don't need it. I'm loud. Norwalk Conservatory of the Arts. First question for Norwalk, innovations initiatives apply to nonprofits as well, or solely for-profit companies?
Solely for-profit enterprises or intending to be for-profit enterprises.
Are there any innovation programs for nonprofits?
Not through my department specifically. So the redevelopment agency has the community development block grant program that supports kind of nonprofits in a separate way through federal funding streams. And then the community services department have their own separate programs as well that support nonprofits.
Are you doing any business roundtables like this for nonprofits in there? Are those
We can-
possibly?
Yeah, we can certainly facilitate something like that. We don't have one on the books, but we're happy to do that.
Second question, in terms of the shark tank thing, it's so cool. We talked about how we would source them and they'd be for specific genres or businesses specifically. How do you, I guess, check conflicts of interest and what that looks like?
So depending on the applicant pools, so say we get 120, each of the 20 are broken into different categories. Maybe it's tech, maybe it's retail, maybe it's, professional services, whatever that may be. We'll have probably around 4 sharks for each of those folks. And then we'll have people sign affidavits that essentially say, I have no financial interest in any of these businesses. Additionally, when business itself gets a contract, they'll have all that information in there that all of my information is correct. I'm not trying to do anything bad. So it'll all be in there, but we'll make sure of that. And then the purpose of having kind of the industry professional, like I said before, it's not just to, make sure they know what you're talking about. It's more like, oh, you're just getting started. So let's make sure that you know somebody who's done this before that can help you out.
I'm just used to 175 funding, which is so exciting. How do we know is it going to continue in all years, or just for 1 year? Is there funding for multiple years?
So we have funding for 2 additional years at this point in time. So like I said, the first round applications are going to be due July 15th, but if you submit after the fact, you'll be put into the second round for the second year. Originally, this expense existed in a capital request through the microgrants program that we for last year. We didn't get any applicants that time, but we didn't have as big of a reach as I think we do now with involving all of our partners. So we have funding from the capital request, also have ARPA, American Rescue Plan Act dollars that we're using as well. So once that kind of funding is ended, which is, in the 3-year period for this year and 2 more, we'll be putting in another capital request for it to hope to get going, but we have funding right now for this year and 2 additional years.
Last question. Steve, it looks like, with the zoning changes, obviously it's 4 years time, but it looks like we're trying to increase residents in Norwalk. Is that a goal of the city?
I don't know if it's the goal to increase resident, I don't know if we describe it that way. Set up where we think we should increase growth. So some other areas we've tried to provide, which has been controversial, and where we've had some, good discussions on is changing some areas from like single family to 2-family or 2-family to this less dense multifamily, and some of the concerns in folks from those areas. We've looked at it, trying to provide housing choice and housing options more so than increasing density.
Thank you.
Awesome. Coming this way. Hello.
Couple of questions, Steve. You mentioned in the business impacts 5B that there's an amendment to the plan of conservation and development pending. Can you give a quick summary to that, or is that available online?
I missed the first part, sorry.
You've noted on your slide that said business impacts, number 5B said that there's an amendment to the plan of conservation and development pending.
There's one related to the waterfront study. That's the only one pending.
Oh, okay, that's pertinent. And I know we met, I didn't ask the question. Do you know a number of how many properties throughout the city may become non-conforming in the new zone change? Is there a number?
I'm trying to think of it. We've looked at specific, when we did the industrial zones, we looked at that. We didn't look at it from that perspective on this. So no, I can find that out and get back to you, but I don't know the top of it.
And just so you know, the waterfront study is online. There's a draft of that available. There will also be next Thursday night at the Economic Community Development meeting, we'll do a review of the waterfront study as well. And then once that gets updated and goes through the process and goes through council, that's when we'll have kind of a public hearing on the POCD being amended and all that fun jazz.
2 quick, 1 longer zoning question. The quick one are these decks on the website?
Yeah, if I could,
Or could you make them be?
So I can make this presentation available for you guys, but also a site on the planning and zoning website that has all of the zoning information specifically on there.
This is a great presentation, thank you. Timeline, it seems incredibly ambitious, effective by the end of 2024. Is the public can derail things, even, whatever? What do you think what's the worst case scenario? Because it sounds like good stuff.
I mean, from my perspective, we've already delayed it a couple times, and that's on me for some of the slowdowns with the edits and things. I think we said from the outset that our goal was not to try to ramp stuff through. We tried to put, we thought was a pretty realistic timeframe to put things together. And based on the feedback we're getting, and I know there's a lot of technical little small things that are still got to get ironed out, but the broader big picture items, I think we understand where people are coming from. My kind of chief goal right now is to get the zoning districts correct. And then where the lines on the map ultimately end up is, that's fine. That's a different discussion. But if I have the zoning boundaries, the kind of general setup of the document there, then where the lines end up at the end is fine. That's the easiest part of the exercise. Here's just why we're there. This is the planning and zoning page on the city site. The second tab on the left is.
You have to share the screen.
Yes. So here's the P and Z page. And on the left is the zoning regulation update tab, which I just clicked on. This is Sabrina's laptop. There we go. Okay. So as you scroll down, there's kind of a preamble, just kind of tells you, what we're doing and why. There's a series of information sheets, which probably answer a lot of the questions the public's asking, why we're doing this, what's form-based code, why we made the changes to the zoning map that are proposed, more information on the schedule, and we're going to be updating that one this week. Some of the changes I talked about: flood zone, coastal area management, sustainability, grading and drainage. And then there, right below that, there are two links here. Gives you a fillable form. It kind of says, it basically asks kind of a little bit of who you are, which section of the regulations you have a question about, and then you can kind of type in your question. All that data is getting put into one kind of repository. That's what's going to get uploaded to the commission and as well as our page. I promise you, what these questions are coming. I'm flattering they are, so we'll leave those as they are. We will provide a response. And just below that is something that I think worked pretty well. Some things don't always work well, but here's the regulations. We broke it down by the different articles because it's a big document. The last one over here is the whole set. And this is which I think worked pretty well, which is interactive zoning map. So once it loads, which takes a second because it's a big database, it's a little disclaimer that pops up, and you just kind of click that, and you punch in your address, City Hall. Keep in mind that this is a national project. Make sure you're clicking Norwalk, because you can click Norwalk, California, and get really confused. So make sure you're in Norwalk. So that takes us right to where we are, City Hall. Then you just click on the parcel, and it pops up and for some reason, sometimes it does the existing zoning first, sometimes it does the proposed zoning first. We don't know why, but we can't figure out the why part. So this one tells you right now your existing zoning is the East Avenue Village District. You click on this, it takes you to what the existing regulations are, as well as the existing kind of Bolton height schedule, which is all the setbacks, how tall the building can be, etc. And if you click up here on that little arrow, that takes you to the new zone. And if you go to click on that, so it's going to the civic zone, you would click on that, and that takes you to the what the civic zone is and all the rules associated with that. We kind of looked at one of those examples before. It has all the setback information, And the other link on there is the use table, which I had highlighted for you. So you would just go there. Here's the civic zone is on the far right, and then you could find whatever use you wanted. One great thing I think with the new regulations is it has a whole section of definitions, because our existing regulations hardly have any definitions, which is a big problem, because we have this book of interpretations, which is almost as big as the zoning regulations, which is not good practice. So sorry, I was a little bit convoluted.
No, that's great. Then my more complex question, and it's very specific. I have a 28 and a 30-year-old, and they want the Norwalk of the future, and they want Wall Street with a Trader Joe's on it. And right now, Wall Street has, you mentioned blight. What are we doing to give them that? Because they just have an accepted offer. They just bought in New Jersey. And I want my younger child here. So, and it's a real issue that there isn't you don't walk to Stu Leonard's. It's not close enough. So how are we handling this empty storefronts where there's one thing they want and that will make them live here?
Yeah, and that might be some of that beyond my kind of bailiwick to answer, but I mean, the city is investing a lot of money in Wall Street area specifically. We're hoping that sometime in the near future that the Wall Street Place project will be up and running, as well as, street improvements, making things, kind of conducive to the kind of atmosphere we want. Jessica is going to expand on things, but I'd say the only thing I'd add is, one thing we've talked about a lot is recruiting businesses or not recruiting businesses as well. And what drives that? I think from my perspective, what we can control is setting up the atmosphere where people want to locate to and be in. That's kind of what one of our focuses is.
Thanks, Steve. So a couple thoughts just in thinking about housing. One is, part of our goal and objective is to make our downtowns successful and to be able to have all our storefronts operate in a meaningful way. And I think that you can see from the grants that we have put together and the programs that we put together, they're specifically focused at that goal and at that outcome, especially with the innovation initiative where 50% is geared to trying to get our streetscapes up and running. Part of that is making sure that there are enough people living in our urban core to be able to sustain certain types of retail and certain types of storefronts. And so the other goal that we have is to be able to target where the housing units are coming in and how they're coming in so that we have the ability to then have the storefronts be successful in meaningful ways. And so, there was a question about, are we looking to continue to grow Norwalk? And to a certain extent, we're looking to be able to solve a demand supply. Your kids shouldn't have to move to New Jersey because we don't have housing that is affordable to them in the city of Norwalk. And part of what we talk about is that, there's one thing when grandparents and parents and children all live in the same house, but I'm sure my parents don't want me living in their house. And I don't know that it would work the other way either. But there is a challenge from an affordability standpoint here. And part of that is a supply demand issue. And we need to be able to address that. But if we address it in a meaningful way and we look at our urban areas, then we have the ability to ensure that those storefronts are open and that they're operating in a way. Obviously, a store like Trader Joe's needs a certain market share to be able to be sustainable. But the other piece is then how are we looking at sidewalks and pedestrian safety and bike lanes, and how are we supporting the mobility piece of that as well? And so we had talked a little bit about a trolley earlier and trying to figure out how to really connect Wall Street West Ave to the train stations in a meaningful way. And so the department is focused on all of these pieces and how they come together. You know, I think that everyone in the room can acknowledge that it doesn't just sort of happen at the drop of a dime. But what we've been able to do in the last 4 years of being the Economic Community Development Office is understand what the community wants through the plan of conservation and development, and then be able to build programs like you heard about today and different policies that help us focus where that development will be or where those housing units can be to be able to achieve those goals over time. Some of the challenges in the Wall Street West Avenue area are that a number of different storefronts are owned by a few select people, let's say. And we've been meeting with those landowners to be able to convince them to lease their spaces to active retailers. And we've done the same on Washington as well. When we've noticed that there have been vacancies on Washington, we've called the property owners into the city and said, hey, listen, what's going on? Is it that the rent is too high? Is it that the space needs to be retrofitted? What are you hearing from your potential clients on what the challenges are? And we've had those conversations in Wall Street as well. And so I think that not only is it asking questions in a group like this, but it's also giving us recommendations. We have $8.7 million in ARPA funding, or we did as of 16 months ago, to be able to focus on economic and community development in the city. It's spread amongst a number of different things, whether that be tree plantings, increasing the number of sidewalks. I was just saying yesterday that in the city of Norwalk in the last 2 years, we've more than doubled our bike lanes in this city. We're actually thinking about a home ownership program of how to put funding into a program where we can help support down payments or help support people in being able to secure home ownership here. And so we need ideas as well to be able to be responsive to what the community wants and what the residents want. And I think it's a little bit of an education piece because as of 4 years ago, we didn't really exist as a city department or a city office. We were spread in amongst different offices and different departments. And at this point, we're all working together. So I think one of the things that we haven't touched on is that we have the Kiva Hub, and Pedro is our capital access manager. And Sabrina, I apologize if you said this. I was chatting to somebody in the back a little earlier. But in November, we announced the Business Development Center, which Sabrina was talking about. Since then, Pedro has been working with small businesses to be able to offer loan programs. We were just notified yesterday that we're the #1 hub in the nation with the highest number of loans being originated here in the city and being awarded. And we have the lowest delinquency rate at 0, and we have the highest payback rate. So we're really trying to be, thank you, thanks, John. We're really trying to be responsive. Do we get it right every time? No, but we're trying to ensure that we hear the feedback, we hear the comments, and that we're being thoughtful about our work and strategic about our work. There's a lot of conversation about grocery in South Norwalk. There's a lot of conversation about grocery, and I think that's the piece of being in a city where we're trying to strengthen the urban core. You know, I lived in Toronto for a long time, I lived in Boston for a long time, and I have to say one of my favorite things on a Saturday morning was to go to the fish guy, go to the butcher, go to the wine shop, go to the cheese shop, and then be able to head home with my bag of groceries and a coffee to be able to host people who were gonna walk over for dinner later in the afternoon. And so when I think about the city and I think about enhancing quality of life for residents, it's a challenge to a certain extent because everybody measures quality of life in different ways. Quality of life for me could be different from anybody else in the room. But at the same time, if we're thinking about being able to create an environment for people to be able to spend their weekend and host their friends and host their family and be able to do that in a meaningful way, that's where we're trying to strengthen our communities and our neighborhoods so that we have the ability to get people in and around and get them social and get them activating spaces. So way too long of an answer on my part, but I wanted to just give you a little bit of perspective.
All right, we're coming back here, and then I'll go back up front.
Mark Hannigan with Choice Peterson Commercial Real Estate Brokers. I would ask the city to start informing all of us about the walk bridge process and what's going to happen. It's approaching a $1 billion cost over 5-7 years. It just seems like it keeps getting pushed out and longer it gets pushed out. And it's a area, residents, retail, and business that will be affected. And as a commercial broker, I'm concerned about bringing people in, and then the tsunami happens to them where roads get closed down and damaged. So just more communication. I feel like we're kind of laying low. It's gonna come. I don't know if this is working. Steve, autonomous vehicles, I read, hey, you can now live, when it comes on, an hour away. You do work when you come in, you do work when you go home. Is there any future planning for changing zoning in fact this happens? Because I assume you don't want to redo these in another 2 or 3 years. And it seems like autonomous vehicles are coming, and parking is a huge issue, both with regulations for residential and commercial. And just wondered if there's been discussion of that and what's the plan is.
Yeah, I can't speak to the walk bridge, and you cut out a little bit, but I think you're talking about autonomous vehicles impacts and what we might do from a land use side. Is that
future parking shifting of regulations if autonomous vehicles do come into play?
We've had some, I would call them preliminary high-level discussions on that, but no specific concrete plans yet. I mean, I think if I recall, it was like 5 years ago, I was at a forum when they were talking autonomous vehicles were going to be here before we did our rewrite, and they're, we're still not there. So it's something we're cognizant of, but we don't have, I don't think we could say we have a plan yet in place for that.
And on the walk bridge side, I can send you the links to their sites. There's a newsletter that you can sign up for specifically, which will tell you all the important information, the road closures, the timeline, all of that fun stuff. We're now seeing, we just had the ribbon cutting, so it's happening. It's started. So I'll get that information to you, and the newsletter, I probably get emails like once a week at least, especially when construction starts ramping up. It'll probably be like a daily, weekly thing. So it'll keep you in the loop. But also now that they started, there's more of a timeline than before when there was kind of, oh, well, the spring, the fall. So we know those dates now. So I can get that over to you for sure. Ryan.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation, Steve and Sabrina and Jess. Seeing that you can view the existing versus the proposed changes on a specific address, is there or will there be a comprehensive document that would show the existing regs and compare and contrast that with the proposed regs so we can get a general sense of what's happening?
We talked about a way to try to merge that, and it was just the format difference between the two was just too stark to try to do that. That's why we tried to put the links in for the existing page. Here's the difference, and see what it is, and then click the proposed to see what the proposed is. But yeah, to try to marry up the two documents was pretty daunting.
Awesome. Did you have another question?
I would just say, in support and non-support, there are landlords on the wall asking for more money per square foot in Times Square. And that's just the reality of the situation. It's absurd. A lot of it's right in the area, and some of them are asking for rates that are so high that it's absurd. Our business is trying to grow. We have certain amount of students coming in, and you're going to more and more growing. There's not enough space even at a rate that makes anywhere near sense for the area. But I think that's a huge, issue as to why we're not seeing. Yes, right. A lot of those landlords. Right. That's the issue. I don't think the city's doing that specifically.
The city has all these perks, which is wonderful.
Yeah. We did actually, so we, about 2 years ago or 3 years ago, we investigated a vacancy stick, however you want to coin it. And what we did learn is that if the space is being actively leased, that the property owner is not in a position to be fined or be served or have a citation. Actively marketed. So if there's a sign in the window that says, please call here if you're interested, if they have an office that is up and running, if they have, and so our understanding is that the spaces on Wall Street are being shown and have been continuously being shown for the last 4 years since we've been in office. However, they're not taking up the applicants. And we've also had other brokers helping the folks on Wall Street get people in to their front doors, and they've all of the potential tenants have been declined by the property owner. So from our city standpoint, we've researched it. We've tried to understand what our role is in trying to be able to entice that. So again, we've met with the property owners to talk to them about it. We've asked what the problem is. We've asked if we introduce programs, can we be supportive of getting tenants through the door? And we've investigated the stick side of the house as well. And because of the way in which they're operating their business, we don't have the ability to apply the stick. So for blight, there are certain requirements as of state statute and local statute, whether they fall into blight or they do not. What I can tell you is that we've actually contacted the property owners to see if they would partner with the city to activate their storefront through active artwork, through being able to advertise for the area itself, being able to help us put posters up on construction work that's going on in the neighborhood. We've asked if they could partner with the Arts Commission in-house to be able to put up artwork. So it's, I can investigate blight further. I don't really know that that is an active way to be able to do it, but I will research it. I will absolutely 100% research it, and I will talk to our blight official as well. Yes, of course.
Awesome. We have a couple minutes left.
Jess, this is for you. I really want to know, how are we getting different people tables, especially when you're dealing with, like, you know, the South Norwalk area? How are we getting different people at the table, you know, to make the decisions on how their community is looking, right? I think it's extremely important, but you see or feel that it's enough people at the table that's coming from the community to really talk towards like what's happening in the community, like in the South Norwalk area. So how do we do that? Or is that being done, or what strategy is being done to get people at the table?
I don't have the performing arts voice, so I'll use this. But so we are, depending on the different project, we usually use the same approaches, and maybe that's the right answer and maybe that's the wrong answer, but we use all of our social media outlets. We also, for zoning, are sending out 29,000 postcards to be able, from door to door here in the city of Norwalk, with different translation to be able to notify people of the public hearing on June the 21st and June the 28th at 6 p.m. in this room, Steve?
No, it's
Virtual, it is virtual. So virtually, we've made our meetings hybrid so you can attend in person and also virtually. And when there's a specific project that we're talking about, we tend to create a technical neighborhood group or a technical community group where we can meet with a certain number of residents in the neighborhood on an ongoing basis to talk specifically about that project. And our expectation is that those community advocates and those community representatives talk with other folks in the community to be able to bring that voice. One of the things that we've done actually in Wall Street, and we just did it with Seaview Avenue on Monday, is we did a walking tour with the community. So we meet at around 6 o'clock in the evening, 5 o'clock in the evening, and actually walk a portion of the neighborhood, a portion of the community, to talk about what folks want. And maybe that's something that we could be doing with the zoning conversation as well. And so we do different approaches. We are absolutely 100% open to ideas and recommendations and ways in which we can communicate with the residents more effectively, right? And so different people, just like what I said about quality of life and being able to sort of, different people have different perspectives on these things. Different communication works for different people in different ways. And so we are happy to meet people wherever they need to be met. It just is a point of us knowing what people want from us and then being able to be responsive. So we've met in the community with folks, we've done walking tours, we do the technical assistance groups if there's a larger project in hopes that folks will talk with their communities about what they would like. And then we're doing the public hearings virtually, but we also do a number of meetings in hybrid as well. And on all social media platforms as well. But as you saw, even with zoning, assuming you have access to the internet, you have the ability to look at zoning, provide comments and provide feedback. If you don't have, if there's not access to zoning, then we'll send the postcards out to be able to have people get that information. And I think it's, for us, it's thinking about how would my cousin get the information? How would my mom and dad get the information? How would my grandparents get the information? How would my friends get the information? And trying to sort of piece out all of those different ways in which people access information and trying to be responsive to that. But again, we're open to recommendations, and if you have thoughts, please let us know.
Also, I'll add to that, from the business side of the house for our programs, Pedro has been literally going door to door with folders for everybody. I'm sure some of you have seen him. So we're slowly, literally taking the zoning information, our program information, our business cards, physically meeting the owners, the managers, and dropping that information off. We haven't really done that because when this all started, it hit COVID almost immediately. So now we're actually doing that. We're going in person, we're going to talk to people, and we're asking them what they want and showing them what we got pretty much. So we're doing as best as we can. But like Jess mentioned, if you have, if there's somewhere you want Steve or myself to physically go attend and talk about any of this stuff, we're happy to do it. I'll be at the SCORE meeting. I've done that a few times. A bunch of different organizations, partner organizations have me come and speak. But like I said, if you have any ideas, feel free to let us know. We're happy to do it. Yeah. Yeah, awesome. Just let us know, and we're happy to, Steve's happy to come, I'm happy to come, Jess is happy to come. Just let us know when. We're always happy to do that. So, all right, any last minute stuff before I kick you all out of here? Thank you, everybody, for coming.